So I'd say, first of all, welcome to this BoF session about improving virtual meetings. It feels a little bit like we should have eaten our own dog food and maybe improved some things before, but let's see how we go. So welcome everybody. I hope you can see my slides. So the co-hosts and presenters in this session are Stephanie Hagström, and I hope I got that right, myself, Stephanie Ketas, Sarah King, Rebecca Koskela, Erin Robinson, and Leslie Wyborn. And if I can find my running sheet, I will actually give an introduction for everyone. Okay, let's keep going. So first of all, just a quick acknowledgement to country. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, sea and waters of the area that we live and work on across Australia and elsewhere. We acknowledge their continuing connection to their culture and we pay our respects to their elders past and present. So for this session, we will do a quick welcome and icebreaker. Then we will run a Menti poll that Sarah King will run. Sorry, we've got two Sarahs and two Stephanies. This will be entertaining. Then we have 5 lightning talks of about 5 minutes each from Erin Robinson about organizing the ESIP Summer Meeting 2020, from Rebecca Koskela about organizing Virtual Plenary 16, the event we're all at, from Stephanie Hagström about organizing the FORCE 11 Scholarly Communication Institute with the catchy acronym FSCI. Then we hear from Sarah King about social interaction, community building and training, and from Leslie Wyborn, who has participated in numerous virtual collaborative meetings. We'll then do a quick breakout topics poll, so we can select a couple of topics for breakouts, and we will have about 30 minutes in our breakout sessions, and there will be about 50 minutes at the end reporting back and next steps. Hope that's going to work reasonably well. Okay, Sarah, would you like to go to the Mentimeter poll? So if everyone could please go to menti.com and enter the code 5695082, that would be great. And I'll stop sharing, otherwise Sarah can't do anything.
Hi all, can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yep, all good.
You can hear me? Okay, great.
Yeah, we hear you. We can hear you.
Good. Okay, so has everyone managed to get into menti.com and then pop in the code? It's 5695082. And this is, I guess, one of the examples that I would use in making meetings more collaborative. So we can take that already as a little meta experience. So this is a little poll that we put together for you. So the first slide is not going to go. There we are. So did I go too far? Sorry.
No, we're
okay.
seeing a question about virtual meetings.
Yeah, that's right. So this one is about which roles you play in virtual meetings. And I imagine that many of you have played many of these roles. So you definitely can choose as many as apply to you.
I know, it's like we need a button that says all of the above. Yeah, it looks like this is a very active group, and it makes sense that you would be the kind of people to come to this particular session, because it seems that everyone's got a lot of experience in that, organising, speaking and attending. I'm interested in the other. Does anyone want to speak up about that other role?
Yeah, I think that might have been me trying to capture all of the above.
So that was you. That was all of the above instead. Okay, cool. Not so many on the technical support end, but yes, definitely lots as attendees, facilitators, and speakers. Okay, that's great. So we've got a little bit of a cross section of the community. So just be really honest. Take your very first impression. What do you think of when you think of virtual meetings? What comes to mind? You get a few goes to put in what you really feel. Don't be shy. There we are. Okay. I don't want to color it. but I think you're colouring it for us. Yeah, there's not a lot of positive statements in there.
Well, there's efficient. That's good.
Efficient, yeah, although efficiency in some worlds isn't that great either, depending on what you want to do. But yeah, I think that's a really good indication that what we're dealing with is something that isn't particularly well received all the time. It's very interesting to see that. Zoom fatigue, I think, will be in the Oxford Dictionary's new words for 2020. All right, so next one. Which 3 topics are you most interested in? I can see there we've already got a few people who've ticked off. And this is, I think, how we're going to shape our breakouts. Is that right, Stephanie?
Yep, that's fine. So given that there's not excessively many of us, I would say we'd probably pick about, how many people are we actually? It's hard to see. Probably pick about 3 or 4, something like that.
All right, well, it looks like engagement and activity is racing ahead. And then we've got 3 evens with the inclusivity and accessibility, networking,
So why don't we,
and lesson learned.
Why don't we take those? Okay, let's change.
Oh, yep, now we've got building community instead, yeah. Give people a little chance maybe to keep adding.
Okay, so it's basically the first 4, if I see that correctly.
Yep.
Oh, lessons learned. I thought that would be a bigger one.
Yeah, so did I.
Or maybe you merge a couple.
Yep.
So the community could maybe go in with engagement. Or
And
I don't know.
I think the lessons learned, we can use that cross-cutting, because I mean, across all of those, there's things where we have learned lessons, and that would be really interesting to hear about. So how about we do it like that?
Yeah. Yeah. And Katie had put in chat building community and networking maybe, and I think they're both about the people connection, so maybe they go better together.
Inclusion and building communities. So yes, it's the first 4. Excellent.
And there's a great example.
No, we've got lessons learned now.
Oh, someone's got in with a late vote. Oh God, I was about to talk about the democratic process, but I think I'll keep my mouth shut here and we can move on.
But the lessons learned, you could do cross-cutting on the other 3, because I think all of these has probably been things we have done differently or wished we'd done first.
Yeah, maybe that would be the best way to do it then. And no one wants evaluation. That's sad. Okay. All right.
All right. So I'll stop sharing my screen now. Is that right?
Yep. And I shall try and share my screen again. Okay. All right. Actually, that was probably not the best of ideas. Erin, are you happy for me to run through your slides, or do you want to run through them yourself?
I am happy for you to run through them.
Okay,
and
cool.
I have my timer.
I want to watch this one, Erin. I saw that number of slides.
Exactly.
I know.
Okay.
I've been called out. Okay, so I'm starting. I'm starting my timer.
You can do it.
I can.
Okay, just before you start your timer, I don't know if everyone knows everyone. So Erin, do you want to just really briefly introduce yourself before you start the timer?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So my name is Erin Robinson. Until the end of September, I was the Earth Science Information Partners Executive Director, and I'll give just a brief intro of ESIP in a second. And ESIP was, I guess, sort of fortunate that our meeting was planned for July. And so we had a couple of months from when COVID hit to when we had to transition. So that's the capacity that I'm talking today, but I've left ESIP in September, and so this is just my retrospective look back. Okay. So ESIP, I've got out my timer. Okay. So ESIP, as I said, is the Earth Science Information Partners. They bring together people much like RDA across the data lifecycle, across sector, and they really are the brain trust of earth science data professionals, and they meet twice a year, once always in January and once in July. Next slide. And so we connect these people by connecting them at the human and the organizational level, where they come together, they create shared understanding, they learn from each other, and then they go back to their home institutions and actually come down the interoperability stack that you see here, and they actually implement those standards and conventions that they've talked about. So we feel like we further interoperability through ESIP by bringing people together both virtually and in person. Next slide. So we shifted our meeting that was planned for July of 2020. It was supposed to be in New Hampshire into a virtual meeting. We made that decision in April, and this is just a glimpse at our meeting by the numbers. So we had 196 first-time attendees, and we had 512 attendees total, and we actually capped our attendance at 500 because we really weren't sure kind of the quality of service that we could offer if they were if we grew beyond that number. We had a lot of teachers and international attendees and a lot of community contributed content, which is really something just like RDA that ESIP is known for, their community generated content. So next slide. And so this slide sort of builds. So our meeting was 2 weeks and it had a 4-day feeling. So Mondays of both weeks were off. And then we had our sort of general content Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And then we had a networking and poster session on Friday. Next slide. And this is just the second part of that slide. So you can see a lot of it was community contributed content with plenaries scattered in between. And one thing that I'll note here is that we on Wednesdays had evening plenaries in the US to try to bring in our Australian partners, which was important to us, but we struggled with time zones. Next slide. One of the things that I would say was a lesson learned was that we lost people over time. And so we had the most attendance we had was at the beginning of the first week, and then it tapered off over the course of the meeting. Next slide. And we wouldn't do 2 weeks again. We felt like it was too long. We used a variety of technologies, and I'm going to dive in on Sketch and KikoChat. We also used Zoom because of the interactive nature and its ability. At the time, it was the only tool on the market that let us go into these breakout groups, which are so important for kind of the interactivity pieces of the meeting and having those small group discussions. Next slide. So I mentioned Sketch. Sketch was a tool that we had used before, that we always use with our meetings, and it's an agenda tool. It allowed us to link to the KikoChat information, and then it also allowed us to link to YouTube streaming, which shared our recording. And the YouTube stream gave us the ability to provide some content for free in an open space, so people could watch the YouTube stream for free, even if they hadn't paid registration to attend. Next slide. And then KikoChat is sort of like StreamPoint that we're using for this meeting. It's really the place where it brought all of the meeting content together in a single place. It was our gate for people who had registered. They were able to come into this space to see who else was there. You can see the tabs here show the Google Doc for the session, the Sketch page, and then also the screen button was the Zoom connection information. So it brought everything together. Next slide. And we can just, Stephanie, if you just want to keep going here, this is what the KikoChat space looks like a little bit up close. Keep going. Here, actually, I want to stop for a second. So I think one of the nice things, we heard a lot of kind of the issues around virtual meetings, but this was one of the first times that we actually got literal sense information about our attendees. So if you go to the next slide, we had profiles and we could see where our attendees were coming from. And next. We had this cool network map that KikoChat also put together. Next slide. And then in the profile, it had needs and offers. And these are things that you might come across when you're talking to somebody having coffee, but this was a way that we actually literally wrote it down. And with that, I will stop because my 5 minutes are up. But in this slide deck, there are also things about the meeting, and I covered a lot of those things going forward, but we can come back to them if we have time. Thank you. And we did,
Thank
I
you
guess
very much.
the ending I will say is that we felt like in the virtual space, we did feel like we met our goals and that people did make connections, which was a real sort of a thing that we were hoping for. So it was all in all, I think, a pretty good experience, just long.
I feel your pain. We did RDA Virtual Plenary 15 over 3.5 weeks, never again. That was no.
And
you know,
Stephanie, I thought I had learned from you, you know? So
well,
anyway.
you know, Stephanie, it was interesting because we were watching RDA. It's like, are they ever going to go virtual? What are they doing? And then all of a sudden it was like, okay.
Yeah, it was a thing that happened within 24 hours. Again, a lesson learned from that is don't do it like that if you don't have to. But, you know, what can you do? Okay. Rebecca, would you like to talk about the Plenary 16 experience?
Yes, and you can do the slides.
I'm happy to.
Okay, I'm setting my timer. Okay, next one.
Oops.
Okay, so P16 was organized twice. They had everything all scheduled for an in-person, including the venue, the hotel, but then we had to switch. Next one. So switching meant that you had to pick a platform, and 3 different platforms were evaluated. And I don't want anybody to take away that I disagree with the choice. When you're actually using something, it's really different than the sales pitch you get. And I think that's what I want to say. But the decision was based on these things. So that there was a set of criteria that we were measuring against. Next one. But I would add these requirements. Make sure that you have access to the platform at least a week in advance. Even if it's the development system, you need to be able to get on it and try it out. It's also important that the vendor has done an academic meeting before, not sales meetings. So in particular, the one we're using now, StreamPoint, did not know what posters meant. They didn't understand that attendees might actually be speakers, poster presenters, and wear multiple hats, and they had pigeonholed people. The other one is registration. The behind the scenes on registration has been a lot of work. And I think one of the things to remember is if you're going to communicate with your community, the email has to come from the meeting organizers, not a vendor, because it ends up in spam, people ignore it. And there's absolutely no reason to break people into categories such as speakers, poster presenters, and only allow one option. Next one. Okay, what has worked so far? So based on responses, the interpretation, that should be the one translation function, sorry about that. The translation function is getting a lot of pluses on it. They really like it. Being able to do pre-recorded plenaries with live Q&A has been really helpful, especially with people that don't have a really strong internet connection. You can do that. And we've gotten really good feedback on the networking activities, and we have a wonderful group of people doing that. So the challenges are time zones, but that's not unique to virtual conferences. Time zones are still a problem. Next one, platform restrictions. That's where, make sure you know about all those restrictions before you go ahead and sign a contract with someone. And their definition of a speaker was not an academic definition of a speaker. They thought it meant you would be speaking in the plenary and no place else. Next one. Okay, the other things, these are my own things that I've learned. It's really important to share any kind of details you can with the attendees of what they can expect from the meeting experience ahead of time. Vendor tutorials are fine, but they don't know the community. The organizers know the community, and they know what kind of questions and information the community is going to need in order to have a successful meeting. And it is also difficult to choose a platform that will work globally, and not just globally within the US. Because people don't always have permission to install software on their computers, Zoom is a problem. You can go to a web page but you cannot assume everybody can install software on their computer. Then there's the differing bandwidths. Some people have really good access and some people don't. Next one. I'm all done. I beat my 5 minutes.
Thanks, Rebecca. That was very fast. If there are any questions for Rebecca, I think we have a minute or so if we want to. And you should all be able to unmute yourselves if you wish. Erin?
I just thought that the point about expectations and helping people understand what to expect, is there anything that sticks out, Rebecca?
Well, I had the
side.
Yeah, I had the experience with KikoChat and the summer ESIP meeting, and I felt really comfortable going in. I had an idea to try it out ahead of time. We didn't even get access. The organizers did not get access to this platform.
3 days ago.
So it was really difficult, and you have to put faith that things are going to work, and that's not how I do things. I need to try them out.
Yeah.
And if we didn't understand, then the attendees are not going to understand either.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Rebecca. So Stephanie Hagström, who's the third person in our list of speakers to have organized the virtual meeting. Stephanie, would you like to introduce yourself and do your talk? And are you happy for me to run through the slides?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Okay, cool.
Okay, let me start my timer. So I come from a little bit different area. I was the director of the Force 11 Scholarly Communication Institute, which is a week-long training institute where people come in for a week, and it's similar to a summer camp where we have classes, 15 hours of classes. People come in and they join 3 classes, and they're in those classes all week long. And so there isn't a lot of what's going on at RDA and ESIP where there's need for a lot of collaboration. There is in the classroom, but it's not community building. So next slide. So we typically in person have about 26 interactive courses. We have group activities, plenary sessions, networking and social events. There is a huge global participation. We have about 120 paid scholars that come from all over the world. It's cross-domain, cross-disciplines, and a lot of library people are there helping teach courses. Next slide. So like ESIP, it sounds like everyone else, we actually were pretty smug because 4 years in a row, we just didn't get our act together until February or March. And this year we got everything planned. Like everything was ready to go in February. All the contracts were signed, courses instructed were confirmed, all the materials were printed. We announced the invitations, and then next slide. 5 days later, the WHO announced that it was a pandemic and we canceled the event. So at this point, we really had to look at trying to recreate a summer camp, which is interactive, like a lot of, where we had hospitality suites where people were drinking and partying every night. There was like, how do you recreate that kind of camaraderie and a lot of cross-domain and cross-discipline? So we really had to do a lot of thinking about that and reimagine different ways. We had different stakeholders, look at the platforms, and then restart. And so what we did was, next slide, we didn't know what the heck we were doing. So we just picked some apps literally off the shelf and hoped that they would work. But we kind of looked at the groups. Like we knew there were people that we had plenaries, and we had plenaries all over the world, people coming in, but we needed a hub. So we picked Sketch like Erin did. And we picked Eventbrite because it seamlessly went into Sketch, and that worked really well because we had people purchasing tickets for courses, and they could go to Sketch and they could pick their course. The other thing that I loved about Sketch is that we could set it that everybody could see the platform and the hub, but if you went to try to join a class, it would say, no, you don't have a ticket unless you bought a ticket. So you wouldn't have access to the materials. But we also used Open Science Framework for all of the courses. So we separated the courses out. You could actually buy a ticket and come to FSCI and see all the plenary, all the networking, and all the fun. And then you could go to a course, and all those we decided to use Open Science Framework because it was open. And it provided a hub for each class where they could get to their Google Drives, Zenodo, Zotero, Mendeley reading list. They could do their syllabi, and all of the students went over there for the whole week. The one thing that I'd say was really great was the Slack channel. Every single person that attended FSCI was on Slack. So there was a lot of interaction going on Slack. And the other thing that we were really lucky is we had the UCLA tech team on board. So we actually hired them, and we had a supervisor that oversaw students, and they managed they were at every single session at midnight, in the middle of the night, didn't matter. Next slide. So the things that changed, of course, is that we couldn't do 26 courses. We actually could have in hindsight, but we decided to do 16 only. And the thing that we required was that the instructors gave it one in the morning and the same class, any synchronous classes, twice a day. So we could hit different time zones. So every class, half the classes started on Monday, the other half started on Tuesday, and they had to do like 8 in the morning and 5 in the evening or 6 in the evening. We recorded every single class, and then within 2 hours, we had those up on the OSF so that any students that missed the class could see the recording. So that helped with the time zone. We had a lot of training. We had a 20-page instructor guidebook, and we had, like Erin did with ESIP, we had daily training. Oh no, it's over. I'm done. I will say one last thing on the international and time zones. We had one plenary that happened all on a 24-hour period. It was a roving plenary, and we had the same panel 5 times in 5 different time zones. And that worked really, really well, not for the speakers, but it worked really well for all the attendees. But the speakers, of course, were there in the middle of the night. So thanks.
Thank you. The fireside chats. Sorry, I was reading fireside cats thinking, what on earth is that?
No, it was. It was the fireside cats. Okay. That's the other thing. We had 21 networking sessions, and they were all well attended. And especially since we had Slack, lots and lots of interaction going on. And those worked really well. There was a lot of interaction outside the sessions.
Oh, that's great, because that's one thing I've noticed with some virtual conferences, that the social and networking things can be very undersubscribed, which is a pity, because a lot of the time they're really great, but if there's only 20 people out of 500, that's just a bit of a shame.
I will, if you give me one more minute, I will share with everybody a really great one that works. So we have one that's called Slideshow Karaoke, and when we're in person, it's in the evening and it's in a suite and there's drinking going on, and what you do is put a set of slide decks together on scholarly communication, but you put in rogue slides, and you have to present someone else's slide deck. So it's you never know what's going to come up on the screen when you're up on stage, and it is hilarious. Like, I mean, hilarious. I laugh so hard, my sides hurt. And nobody misses it. It's become like this tradition with FSCI. So we weren't sure how we were going to do that online, right? But we did it anyway, and it was just as hilarious. The problem was, and I think I shared this with some people the other night, was there was this prize that we gave out in person, which was a bottle of champagne. And our very first year, we said, go get the bottle of champagne for the winner. And we turned around, and Danny Kingsley from Australia was just pouring herself a drink out of our prize bottle. And so we were like, oh my God. So it became the Danny Kingsley Prize, and we have to we now give everybody a half a bottle of champagne. And so this year we had to literally ship half a bottle, bubble wrapped. I don't even know if it made it. I have to find out whether it made it or not, but that winner got it in the mail this year. So that one I would recommend.
That's good. Thanks, Stephanie. Okay, so now we actually moved geographically from the US because our first 3 speakers have been from the US to Australia. So Sarah, would you like to do your talk and maybe also introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I'm the Training and Engagement Lead at ARNET, and ARNET is Australia's Academic Research and Education Network, the equivalent of Internet 2 or Canary, as you have in North America. So over the last year and a half, I've been developing and delivering workshops that have been in-person experiences at various events. Lots of conferences, research bazaar, in-house workshops on campus in a range of institutions all the way across Australia. And I loved it. I was flying around every week, a new campus. It was great. And then, of course, the pandemic was announced and all of the travel restrictions meant that I had to stay at home and figure out how to do my job differently. So next slide. So we just had to gorge on Zoom, didn't we? All of us. We just went bananas at the beginning. Everyone was just, yep, whatever it is, we'll just do it on Zoom. And we're all on these Zoom meetings constantly. But yeah, with no real other way of reaching the audience in person during lockdown, we had to adapt to online learning. So this was a swift and, I will admit, occasionally brutal experience, but I learned a lot. So I thought I'd share it as this experience with you. And these are things that I've learned and I'm still learning. I don't think I've got this perfected by any stretch, but I think these are things that could be adapted to any group online experience, especially small groups, whether that's a meeting, an informal event, or something that involves anything that involves communicating with others via video call. Next slide. So to cut to the crux of it, I think the main question really to have an answer to for any of your meetings is just, what are you doing here? What are your values? And really just have that quite clear. And once you've got those answers in place, you can start working with your content and your approach to doing things. So for me, I'm often working with people who are nervous about learning about technology and new digital skills, and picking up people who are highly professional in other areas, but they don't have those foundational skills. So they're accomplished professionals who know their turf, but they're not used to being in learning mode. And that means that they have to make mistakes. I don't know what's going on. And so for me, the main value is that no soldier is left behind. And my work is really about helping those people who are struggling the most, not those who are forging ahead. So how do I do that? I think really for all of us, if you can adopt wholeheartedly the basic tenet that everyone, and that means everyone, so you know, those who can't find the keys on the keyboard, the people who are always on mute, whatever, they all should have a chance to learn and contribute in the space that I create. So it's based on a strengths-based approach, acknowledging the skills you already have in the room, telling people that you know they're accomplished and skilled and not some kind of empty vessel that you're there to fill up. Everyone has expertise in something and they should be allowed the opportunity to share that. The other thing is to keep to your path. So set a good itinerary and keep to that. So make sure that what you're doing is clear and lay that out. But also with your wayfinding, it's okay to also look at the view. So if somebody wants to go on a little bit of a tangent, I think that's okay. And it creates that kind of sense that people can easily contribute, whether it's right on target or not. The other thing is to meet people where they are and not where you expect them to be. This is physically as well as intellectually or whatever. And that might mean, you know, inviting pets in, having kids in the room, accepting that people are going to be in their car or in the park or wherever they are. I've found that some of my trainer colleagues get very frustrated with certain things like that. But I think the minute you invite that in, you as a trainer can relax about it. Next slide. We have, however, learned how really draining this is. And I think anyone who has made this transition this year can identify with this image. Like, I'm sick of it. I think you all did it at the beginning. It's been exhausting. So next slide. How do we approach, so how do you translate into specific actions these kinds of approaches? For me, it's about creating a safe environment. And this is really important. As you are the facilitator, it's your job to set the boundaries. Define or use a code of conduct, have a strategy for dealing with behaviours that you have previously defined that detract from that safe environment. And that needs to be explicit, very clear to your participants. Some people are flourishing in online communication where they found it hard in person, but the opposite can be true. Some people don't like talking on camera. They've got other things going on behind them. And we need to deal with that. And I think that's where online actually can really come into its own if we're not trying to just recreate an in-person thing, but use what's there. So use those other options, the chat, the non-verbal reactions in Zoom, collaborative documents. It's amazing what people will share on a document that they wouldn't share verbally. So make the most of that. Use private chat for help, and often having enough people in the room to help out if you're doing anything technical is really a way to get all of that sort of fizz down for people. And if they can do that privately, they feel less exposed. And really, yeah, just making the most of that environment that we have. Two-way feedback options are really important as well. This is where you as a facilitator, you've got to take it on the chin, you've got to ask for feedback, you've got to ask for it often. You can use online polls, you've got Mentimeter or the polls in Zoom, for example. And I think specific questions and this, you know, what questions do you have? What feedback do you have? What can I improve? All of that, give people that opportunity to be part of what you're doing. And the last one, taking that community-centered approach. So just be there for other people. You may have your own goals or agenda, and that's okay, but if they don't meet or match the people you're with, the result may not be so successful. So you need to be part of the community you're trying to reach as well, and that's not easy. Next slide. So just lastly, I think it's really, really important to celebrate all wins. I think this year has been so compressed. We've just been smashed. And you really need to just take a minute to celebrate wherever you can, when you can. Take more time to talk about each other's successes, what you like about how people do things. Focusing on people's behaviors rather than personality or looks is really important as well. But just taking some extra time out to celebrate is really important. Now, a lot of this I got not because I'm, you know, thought of it all myself. Next slide. It's because I've trained as a carpentry trainer, and I think there's quite a lot of really good information in the carpentry. So I've got some links as well. So this has been around for quite a long time now, and they've really always been strong on in-person events, preferring that at all, you know, whenever possible. But you know, 2020 had other plans. So here's a list of other options or you know, things that you can do. But I think really, bottom line, it's so powerful to be really present. Demonstrate your vulnerability, your fallibility, your likability, play music, introduce a cat, have some fun, check in with your participants, and just be honest about this experience we're all having. I think, you know, we're all in it together and we'll keep learning. But yeah, I think that that's really what I've got for you today. Thanks. The last slide is some links that you'll have access to if you need them.
Thank you, Sarah. And last speaker is Leslie. Leslie, would you like to very briefly introduce yourself and then go through your slides? And I'll move them on.
All right, thanks, Steph. So my name's Leslie Wyborn and I work for a few groups and I've tried to list a few of them there. But what I want to do is just give my perspective from organising sessions, convening sessions, and also being a participant in meetings. Next. So key lessons as a presenter convener, it takes more time to prepare presentations virtually. Gone are the days when you can do your talk on the plane or even minutes before. And I just deliberately broke my rules. You can't fit as many words on the slides as the screens are smaller. It takes time for convening and chairing. You can't organise a session in the bar the night before or even at breakfast. You have to be on your toes for the whole session and not do emails while you're chairing a session. And as you can see here, it can be really hard to stimulate interactivity when you're staring at black screens and people have had to turn their videos off because of bandwidth. It takes more training. This is something a lot of people can't get used to because each conference, you've got to do different training because they tend to choose a different platform and or deploy the same platform in a different way. And I'd make the complaint here at RDA that most platforms are not fair and there's not much standardization yet. Ensure that there is a qualified technical support. I use the word qualified because I've had tech support that knows less about the system than I do for each session. Social events, now we've had stories about they're hard to replicate and some have been a success. My consensus is, and I'd ask how many people here at this session have actually put into their email, sorry, I'm not here, I'm at RDA for the week. I bet everyone still has their normal work hour meetings in their time. So people are not completely switched off, and these social events just add to trying to get everything in the one day. Next. There are real issues with diversity, equity and inclusion, and people find it hilarious that I live 1 kilometre from the CBD in Canberra and I'm in a black spot. So I rarely turn my video on because of that. But think of people in low to middle income countries, fancy bandwidth hungry widgets, tools and eye candy just are not on. It's interesting that the senior members of the community are particularly challenged, especially those that are not active in social media. They're finding this environment very challenging, and the time zones are a perennial killer. And I've just put a reference there to AGU's best practice for inclusive remote meetings, and I think it's worth having a look at. Next. The positives, the online chat are brilliant, and what's really coming out is that they're starting to get ECRs, people with physical disabilities or language barriers to participate. Registration costs are much lower, and there's some indication that profits are higher. Registration numbers are higher, but people attending the conference full-time is lower. People really do select sessions, and there's anecdotal evidence coming out that session abstract submissions are lower. And so I said, travel has prohibited people from low to middle income countries for face-to-face, and they're starting to really latch on to these virtual conferences. And ECRs are also being able to participate more because the travel funding has been removed. And so we actually say that conferences are being democratized. They are no longer the purview of those with funding, big budgets and time. Next. Oral sessions can be a pain. BoF's poster sessions have transitioned well. Those places where they ask you to pre-record a talk and then you've got to go through 2 hours of talks the night before and then have a Q&A session are a joke because people are just not really going through all the presentations. And so I'm seeing a trend towards having oral sessions that are live. There's a pre-recorded presentation, which is great because it means the sessions run on time. And during it, there's lively chat, discussion, lots of questions. So that's really good. And I think that's something that's starting to come back. Next. And so I guess my full message is it's not going to go back to full F2F. Pre-COVID, organisers of big conference were being hassled about their carbon footprint. And COVID has done more to address the carbon footprint dilemma of face-to-face conferences. And the European Geophysical Union have declared they'll never go back to full face-to-face. For conferences of any size, cheap fares, airfares will not return for at least 2 years, if ever. That's being really negative. But even if we do, I'm sure people are going to be even more sensitive about carbon. And they're also, virtual conferences to me are here to stay and we have to make them work. And this picture I have in this is of a poster hall at the AGU meeting. There's 2,000 posters there and they changed every day. As a means of communicating your science, I'm sure the next generation is going to laugh at us. And so that's why in this BoF, we want to hear from you, your opinions on how it's going to work. Thank you. Next.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. This was actually the point where we had thought at some point we'd do the breakout topics. So remember, the first 4 were the ones that were chosen. So how can virtual meetings be more inclusive? How can we make virtual meetings more engaging and interactive? What technologies and techniques can support networking? conversations, the hallway chats that we have, and how can we continue to build a community in the virtual space. Now, I shall just go to the next slide.
Okay.
So, yep.
So,
Leslie, will you explain?
Yeah. Behind the scenes, this is something that we hope will improve, but right now Stephanie has to manually put you in each session. So you heard what 1, 2, 3, and 4 were. And so what I want you to do is go to your picture, and up the right, you can see you've got a mute button with 3 dots. If you click on the 3 dots, a drop list comes down called rename. And what we want you to do is, based on the groups that we said, 1, 2, 3, 4, can you please put those numbers in front of your name? And that makes it much easier for Stephanie to assign you to a breakout. So what will happen is we'll just have about a minute's silence while Stephanie does that, and we'll see you in your breakouts. For each breakout, there's a sheet for you to fill in the notes and someone to take notes, and then we'll have a report back. So towards the end of your breakout, make sure you've got what the 3 key points are that you want to bring back.
Okay, just a slight change. So there is one Google Doc and it has sections 1 to 9 for those different topics. So we'd expect you to do that the first 4. And please also pick a speaker to report back towards the end. And I'll just go back to the topic list. So just remember 1, 2, 3, and 4. And okay, all right. I shall see how that works. I might just stop sharing my screen because that makes my life a bit easier, if that's okay. Has everyone picked a topic?
What? I don't know where the topics are. Sorry, Stephanie. Here we go.
Just pick number 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay. And we will have to make sure that we have a facilitator in each. So for example, Erin has picked 4, and Rebecca has picked 4. So it would be good. Leslie has picked 1. So one of us should pick 2, one of us should pick 3 for, anyway, I'll start assigning people, but I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, and I tried to put the 4 topics in the chat. So the first one's about inclusivity, second one was about being interactive, third was the networking, and 4 is community building.
Okay, just give me 1 sec. This is actually a little bit messy. Okay, let's try and see what we can do. So,
Stephanie, I can go to 4 if that helps. I've had someone invite me into 4.
And I'm just trying to assign 1
Rebecca's
more person.
in 4.
Yeah.
Okay, so I shall try to open all rooms and see if that works.
Okay.
Okay. Looks like we've got everyone back. I hope we haven't lost anyone on the way. Cool. Okay, so how about we do a bit of reporting back? Have you all been able to put your key points into the document? If not, there we are. How about I share my screen again and hope it's the right one. That one. So I'm not going into presenter mode, but we can either copy or type the things in here if you want, or do you want to go through the Google Doc? Would that be better?
We put our points in the Google Doc.
Okay.
Yeah. I think Google Doc too, right. Stephanie.
Okay, I can actually copy them because I've got the Google Doc here as well. All right. Leslie, I think you were in room 1. Leslie, are you there?
Helen's going to report back. Stephanie,
okay, cool.
She's ready to go. Okay.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Helen.
Okay, wonderful. So Leslie and myself, we were part of Breakout Room 1, and we have about 4 themes that we came up with. One was regarding the delivery medium. Of course, we do recognize that face-to-face conferences are expensive. So going virtual has opened a lot more doors for many individuals across the globe, but particularly for low income and middle income countries. But one feature that I feel we all have to be mindful is translation function. So that is something that I really appreciated in the current RDA plenary, that you offered the translation services for English to Spanish and vice versa. So I feel if we can continue to practice that, that'll be really good with regard to the delivery medium. And the second point that we discussed was regarding physical disabilities. So, we particularly focused on individuals with visual impairment and hearing impairment. So with regard to visual impairment, I think it's quite challenging that we still haven't, or at least from both of our earlier experiences, we haven't come across any conferences or spaces that have exhibited inclusive practices for incorporating visually impaired individuals, especially at a conference level. This is even at international conferences. But with regard to hearing impairment, we've seen people sign language and all that, but I'm not sure how we can sort of integrate that into Zoom meetings. But I think that'll definitely be a valuable consideration if we can try and implement it. And the third factor that we considered was regarding accessibility and inclusivity. So here again, we spoke about the language function, as well as for participants from low and middle income countries, like how are we going to, this is also seeps into concerns with regarding bandwidth and technology. So how are we going to ensure that individuals from LAMIC countries are not always passive participants, but rather active participant in the entire 5 days or 3 days workshops or conferences that we deliver? So that was something that we thought we should sort of consider. And lastly, it was regarding the time zones. One strategy that we followed is that offering at multiple time points, which definitely is helpful. But are there any other ways that we could think of offering or ensuring that we're all in same time zone? I know it is extremely challenging, but I think it will be worthwhile if we can brainstorm and come up with some creative ideas around it. And the final point under time zones is that we need to also be extremely mindful and aware of ensuring or devising time slots that are family friendly, because sometimes I find a lot of times are family unfriendly time slots that are being offered. So the discussion that we had was, both of us, we live alone, and therefore it really doesn't matter what time I check in, what time I check out. But imagine if people who have children or elderly who needs caregiving, then they cannot be spending a lot of time on Zoom or any kind of virtual continuing education for that matter. So I think we need to be really mindful of that as well if we are to take forward virtual meetings and virtual conferences. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much, Helen. Room 2, how can we make virtual meetings more engaging and interactive? Who would like to report back?
I'm happy to do that. Okay, so when we were talking, we discussed we tended to talk about networking events and non-science events, so more like the engaging part of it, and we weren't talking about interactive meetings during a scientific session. We were talking about networking events. So with that in mind, one of the things that we talked about was how important the session facilitators are and engaged with the audience. So someone that's more type A, that's comfortable with talking to people in the room, than assigning someone who would maybe not know how to do that. So the facilitator was really important to set the tone. And then the sessions have to be planned carefully, much more carefully than they do in person, and leaving extra time for interaction, and scheduling like we did today with the session today, that we were all very clear what we were doing from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. And that was very important. And the other one was to bring in different apps and tools to engage the audience, like we did today with Menti. And Slido or some other ones. We did a quiz with Google Forms the other night, and what that does was it broke the ice at the very beginning, and there were some funny questions, and so people started talking while they were filling out the questions, and that kind of allowed a more comfortable engagement in the event. So having some sort of tool where people don't have to talk, but they can vote, was really important. And then the hours, and someone just mentioned that, but less hours per day. So perhaps having blocks of time. So maybe the conference is 4 days or 5 days, but you have from, maybe twice a day, you have one block in the morning, and then you repeat it in the evening for a different time zone. But it isn't all day long. I mean, nobody has all day long anymore. And so having those blocks of times, like 2-hour sessions or something like that. And then the networking events that we were talking about need to be scheduled. These random events that we try to put together and get people to interact without a time have failed miserably in the 3 events that I've been involved with. And so interactive events need to be on the calendar and organized. And then we got into a conversation a little bit with how the team organizing all of this, that during virtual events, it's really important that there's a strong communication plan and that everybody knows who's in charge of what area. And there are a lot more areas that need to be overseen and in charge of, like technical facilitators, moderators, who's going to handle this, the apps, who's going to handle Sketch, who's going to handle the Slack, who's going to handle the help desk. So there's just a lot more need for training in specific areas now that really need to be individual people, not one person can't plan everything anymore.
Yeah, that's true. I would make one comment about the networking events being scheduled. So I went to a conference recently where they were always at the end of the day, and you had 6 hours of sessions, and then you had half an hour networking at the end. And you can probably imagine how many people rocked up for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, one thing we talked about at the time was maybe to have them straight after a keynote or something, because then people even have a topic that they can talk about potentially, rather than just sort of tacking them on at the end as an, oh yeah, we need to do that too kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, the networking events that I've been involved with that are planned well are a lot of fun, but you're right, the percentage of people who come is very small. I mean, we had maybe less than 10% at our first one. And that was
busy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm mindful of the time. We've only got a couple of minutes left. So who would like to talk about the key points from room 3 about, oops, where did it go? I think I've deleted the wrong one. That was networking.
And I'll be quick. Yeah, we had a really good conversation about different experiences that we've had and how, some things work and some things don't, and there's lots of different complications. So I think, Stephanie, it resounds a lot with what you were talking about, that we do need to put a lot more effort into all of these things, a lot more planning, and make sure there are a variety of options available, because there are, we talked about that classic introvert versus extrovert thing, and it can be hard for some people to speak up. So to have an online option while you've got a live speaking option going can be a really good way to manage that. we also talked about how it would be awesome to have some more flexibility around getting more small groups together. I think we've all had experience of big groups and then that one-on-one speed networking and things like that, but if there's an option for dropping into a small group. And we had an interesting chat about norms and you know, can you just roll into a breakout room like Josh did, which was fantastic because it actually happened. And you know, just being a bit more flexible about the different ways that people want to interact. And yeah, I think that's it. Just intentionally setting out really deliberate spaces is where we feel like we need to be moving next. It's all been a bit haphazard and we're all learning, but I think if we can create deliberate spaces, set out the norms, tell people exactly what's expected of them, and hopefully we'll be able to keep increasing our levels of engagement.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, and as I said, I've just deleted the wrong slide. So the number 4 was community building, wasn't it? So I'll fix the titles. Who would like to report back from room 4?
I can jump in and do that really quickly. So the main things that we talked about, I think was brought up by Erin, that resonated with the rest of us as well, was just thinking about the time span of building community. So, you know, it takes more than one conversation to kind of get to know people, to see what people are interested in, that kind of thing. And so figuring out how to, I guess, keep people coming back to things, and making sure to follow up after connections have been made. And I think too, one of the thing that the previous group just said, having an intentional space. And so everybody is kind of on board with the same ideas, and why they want to be there. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, I'll just copy your last points from the group in here. Now, we have pretty much run out of time, so I'm mindful that some of you may have to leave, but I just wanted to really quickly ask, what would people like to do as next steps? And just to preface that, we've had a similar BoF that we ran at eResearch Australasia, some of us, so Sarah and Leslie in particular, plus a couple of other speakers, one other speaker. And we have had some similar discussions, not quite like this, in that group as well. And we also asked them whether there would be an interest in further conversation, and quite a few people said yes. So in the Google Doc that we shared, I think quite a few of you have signed up. And if you haven't signed up and would still like to sign up, please do so. And quite a few of you have also said you'd be interested in further conversations. So what we can do, one thing we could do is we could just bring those two groups together and just sort of send out an all-encompassing email saying, this is what we've done, here are the Google Docs that we've created, what would we like to do from there? But is there anything specific that this group would like to do moving forward? And it could well be that you say that was nice. I've heard a couple of interesting things, and that's enough. That's perfectly fine as well. So I don't want to press gang anyone into doing anything. But are there any spontaneous thoughts on this?
So one I have, Stephanie, is just like to bring together resources. So I know like when you've been planning RDA plenaries, you've done summaries about different platforms. What I found really useful in the session today is just the pooling of knowledge, lots of new tools for different things that I'd not heard about. So even just trying to like bring together lots of these lessons into one central place would be helpful, because I know I've got references to millions of different documents where different groups have done some kind of analysis as they've been planning their event.
So one thing that I was thinking of is, so we all probably have those resource folders, and I went to a meeting that CSRO organized 2 months ago, and that was fantastic because it had a lot of resources as well. So what we could do is we could set up a Google folder and create a curated list of things, maybe even on those topics like inclusivity, networking, things like that. And it would be great if people could just add suggestions, and in particular also things that have worked for them. So for example, yes, I've used this particular tool and it worked well, or I've used this tool, bear in mind the limitations or whatever. So that might be a useful thing. I don't know what people think about that.
Well, I have a question.
Yep.
Fiona, is your group doing this already? Do you have something already set up?
Right. Yeah. So we're working on a Force, well, as a Force 11 working group on particularly open science training and the move to virtual, and the fact that that's yeah, there's been this big sort of kickstart in this direction. I can give you I'll put the reference into the chat, but that's, I suppose that's, it's a slightly different topic. It's very much related,
but it's open, yeah.
But it's yeah, but it's so we've pulled some material together, but we haven't actually formally pulled material together yet. But I'm just sort of trying to think actually how that might work, whether we should like liaise, come back to this group if you like, and say this is how we're doing it, because we're wanting to make a permanent or semi-permanent, like a permanent list anyway. So
well, we should start it then. I mean,
yeah, so maybe we should and actually, in fact, Stephanie, you are also, well, you're technically a co-leader on the group. Yeah. I know you've had a lot of job changes and things going on, so it's been a bit difficult. So,
but Stephanie,
I'll jump in and
yeah,
I'll jump in and add something that I think that's a great idea, and the idea of adding techniques in and not just tools. So it's not just technology, but and whether it's conferences or just work meetings, like I saw this new technique or I tried it last week and it was useful. Mm-hmm. I like the idea of being able to cumulatively add to something, even if they're tiny tidbits.
I love that idea, Katie. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's so important for us coming from all different directions. We're all going to cotton on to different things and crossing over. Like I think Katie was talking about some things that happen at school online and some of the things that you might be seeing with children doing school, and they might be doing amazing engagement things, and why not transfer them over into our spaces as well. So I'd love to see that kind of cross-fertilization going on.
Sorry, I'm just typing, which you can probably hear. So, so there seems to be generally no issues with the idea of having something like a resources list or resources folder or resources something that we could maybe all contribute to, perhaps together with the people who attended the eResearch Australasia BoF. I mean, they had some ideas as well, so we could put those together. And it would be not just tools. So that means we wouldn't just be adding tools, because that's one thing, but it's also good to know how people have used them and what kinds of things to be aware of. Main thing would be, where would this live? We could work that out. It can live in someone's Google folder, but that's probably not such a great thing. I don't know if we want to place this on the RDA platform. It's sort of a side topic, if you like, for RDA, but I mean, I could certainly set something up there, I think. But we could also do it somewhere else in a different space.
We have the RDA US drive too, if you want to put it there.
Okay.
Yeah. I think the main thing about like where something goes is that it's easy for people to contribute, because obviously like there's a global community in RDA, but then you've also got the Force 11 group, and there might be people who are in that but not in the other, or there might be like others in the community. Like I expect like some of my JONC colleagues wouldn't have ever been to RDA, but they've probably got similar resource lists. So something that makes it easy, like you don't have to be a member of anything. So like Google, well, I know you.
So we could stick it in the RDA Google folder, which everyone can, a file that everyone can edit, similar to the session documents. That would be one option. So you wouldn't have to be a member of RDA, but you would have to have access to a Google Doc.
Yeah.
Now that excludes potentially people from China. I don't know if anyone has a better idea on that.
No, but we could, if someone from China could send, maybe we could give instructions, if we ask people, that we could have them send information, and I don't mind adding it, but they wouldn't have access to see it is a problem.
I can check with one of my colleagues whether, because she works with people from China, she's Chinese, so she would potentially have some insights into that. And I think there might be other countries that block Google as well.
It's less fun and useful in a way, but Etherpad is another option for it. I mean, that's very lightweight, very kind of flimsy thing, but I don't think any limitations anywhere on Etherpad if people want to use that one. That's what the carpentries community uses everywhere.
Okay, I'm mindful of the time we've run over time. And incidentally, at the eResearch Australasia conference, our session ended on the dot automatically. We had no choice, which was slightly unpleasant. But I want to sort of, I want to be mindful of people's time. So how about we send an email out after the session if you've signed up on the sign up sheet and said you would like to be involved in further conversations, then we'll email you probably next week with a suggestion for where we put things, and maybe we can then work out what information we want to capture in there and how we want to capture it, because we could, you could do this in many different ways. So what kind of information would be useful for people? If we put in a tool, what would you like to know? If you put in a tool, what would you like to put in with it? And then we might go from there. How's that? Is that okay? Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much,
Stephanie.
Thanks everyone for joining and for contributing so much. That was great.
Yeah,
and enjoy the rest of your day. Sorry.
If it's the middle of the night, thank you. You get 10 points from me.
It's 1 a.m. for Alex.
You can see it's lunchtime.
Very heroic.
Thank you.
Stephanie, I've copied the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I was going
Leslie.
to ask about that.
Yeah, it's in the notes at the bottom.
Yep, and I will make sure that the edited version of this recording, there's some bits in the middle where someone popped into the main session and was then moved to a breakout room. I think we'll cut that out because it mainly involves conversation that we probably don't want recorded. And I think if there's anything you don't want on the recording, let us know. I think we can cut bits out. But that's just by the by.
Yes, you can cut bits out. I had an embarrassing thing happen yesterday. And StreamPoint person assured me they could be cut out.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, well, thanks very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, night, or whatever it is.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.